The Democrats currently hold the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Even though the Democrats control the federal government, their majorities are extremely thin. Democrats hold the House by 8 seats and the Senate by 1 seat when you count the vice president as the tie-breaking vote. However, the situation is much more complicated. Because of the slim majorities, right-wing Democrats are leveraging their power and controlling the agenda. As a result, some of the promises Democrats ran on look like they have no chance of ever passing. However, some Democrats have been more than happy to work with the Republicans on infrastructure plan. While this may seem nice on the surface, the true devil is in the details. On today's podcast, we're going to discuss the true nature of the infrastructure bill and how it can affect working class people for years to come.
So we always say the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.
Hey everyone, my name is Andre Walton, and I'm joined with my co-host today, Will Walter, and welcome to the Our Wisconsin Revolution podcast. How you doing today, Will?
I can't complain, Andre. Another day, another scandal in the political world, another day of the working class getting screwed over. What else is new?
Yeah, same stuff, just a different day. That's how it always goes. But I'm really glad we got to get back on another podcast. It's been a little while for us, and that's mainly due to, obviously, a extremely busy schedule and some changes in the Our Wisconsin Revolution structure. So it's been a little bit of craziness going on, but I'm really happy that we're getting back to this. But today we're really going to dig into some mainstream stuff that's been going on, such as the infrastructure bill, what just recently happened with Nina Turner in her race, and obviously a little bit about the eviction moratorium. So first thing I want to get into is the infrastructure bill. So there has been a lot going on with the infrastructure bill. So one of the things that really shocked me is, how embracive like Joe Biden was to the bipartisan bill. And the reason why I was really shocked by that when it first came about and they did this press conference was because if you looked at the details of that initial infrastructure bill, it was literally the same as the Trump infrastructure bill. And as if you look back at that time, Democrats were wholly against it, but now that Joe Biden is in office, they were for it, or if not for it, they were very quiet about the pay for it or how they're going to pay for it. So to get into detail, what I mean by that, for example, there were two provisions in there about public-private partnerships and also asset recycling. So to explain what that is, so asset recycling is when you basically sell off old infrastructure, so like old roads, bridges, parking meters, things like that, weird stuff, to pay for the new infrastructure. So that means that some of the publicly owned infrastructure would be owned by private sector, and they can charge you for using their roads and bridges or et cetera. So they might have like tolls or something like that. And the public-private partnerships are a little bit different. So that means, like, for example, they will lease something that the government owns, and then they would be able to make the profit off it. So they'll the revenue wouldn't go to the government anymore, go to like Wall Street or something. So that's why it was extremely controversial when Trump introduced it, but then it wasn't so as controversial when Biden basically essentially introduced the same plan. So that's why it was really weird that so many people were like hailing this as like a great plan, and it's really not. But now they've kind of dropped those provisions because like people like Bernie Sanders and people in the squad have like kind of raised some ruckus about it, and probably some other Democrats as well. But even now, like the pay-fors aren't that great. So they are completely refusing to raise taxes on the rich, which is probably the best and easiest way to pay for it, considering they evade so many taxes. I mean, raise their taxes, close the loopholes, and make them pay for it.
I think closing the loopholes is
that's more than enough
the biggest
in itself.
part of that.
You don't even have to raise taxes. If you close the loopholes, I mean, you're basically paying for it right there. You don't even have to raise the taxes.
Hundreds of billions of dollars in uncollected taxes every year from the rich avoiding.
So I just seen that some of the pay-fors, they're not as bad. So it's not like asset recycling where we just talked about or public-private partnerships. But there is some concerning things that I've seen, such as like they want to like make some cuts to Medicare Part D, which wouldn't be good. So it's almost kind of like they're sneaking in some Medicare cuts in here, which I don't appreciate, because they've been trying to figure out ways to cut Medicare for a long time, and this kind of seems like that red herring to do that. So yeah, it's still a little bit concerning. It's not as bad, but it's still not good, because they are refusing by all means to raise taxes on the rich. So I mean, I don't know if you got a chance to really dig into the infrastructure, but like, what are your thoughts on the infrastructure bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying that the United States has fallen significantly behind a lot of the rest of the industrialized first world nations in terms of our nation's infrastructure. The Army Civil Corps of Engineers rated us, what was it, a D or a C minus?
Yeah, C minus.
C minus for our national infrastructure. And if you go to some small town rural communities, or depending on the city, even there are some cities where this is a major issue. Our roads are in complete disarray. Bridges are falling apart. We just don't seem to care about keeping the nation functionally working. And it's stunning to me that the richest country in the history of our species can't allocate the resources to even keep basic societal necessities up to par. Frankly, it's embarrassing.
Well, it is embarrassing, but we know why that is. It's not because they just can't get it done, but it's because if they do this, it always has to be of the cost of the taxpayers to benefit the rich. So they're always trying to find ways to, benefit their campaign donors or benefit their wealthy friends, or even themselves sometimes. So like they're like, if we can't figure out a way to benefit those who like keep us in office or ourselves, then it's not really worth doing it. Like our government
the
longer
debt ceiling's only a problem when it comes to stuff that'll help society in its entirety rather than simply the ruling elites. $1.4 trillion tax cut for the ultra rich. Nobody says jack shit about how are we going to pay for it, but as soon as you suggest fixing our roads, fixing our hospitals, fixing our bridges, then it's, oh well, where's the money going to come from? How could we possibly afford this?
Exactly. And it's not like we can't do things or we can't afford things. I mean, if you look at other countries, like they have really nice like high-speed rails, they have really nice roads, and that's because they're actually investing into their country, because they know if they invest into their country, then they're gonna make it back on the back end. Because obviously, if you have better roads, you're gonna have more transportation of like shipping without like high car costs or something like that. So I mean, there's a lot,
and that's not even getting into the climate benefit of transportation, like rail transportation or something, where you're taking cars off the road. You're allowing people to get from place A to place B without everybody needing to have their car, which is also beneficial in terms of parking, the space that is required to have that many cars on the road.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like they're protecting the old system because so many people are still benefiting off the old system. That's just like big oil. That's the reason why we haven't really transitioned our energy sector, because so many people are still benefiting off the oil industry. And that's why they're
and
like,
those who
oh,
benefit
we can't.
Are big.
That's what was.
Oh, go ahead.
They're like, that's why we can't like have electrical cars, or that's why they don't want to transfer to like these high speed rails or more efficient traveling systems, because like the car industry is like, well, you can't have that because then our sales are going to dip. And so it's really just to protect the old systems, but that's really antiquated and a dumb way to live in society, because if we live by that in like the 1800s, we'll still literally be using like the horse and buggy and horse and cart like system, because they wanted to protect the horse industry.
The difference though is that in the 1800s the horse industry wasn't lobbying the politicians, giving millions and millions of dollars to their campaigns explicitly to help them get reelected, so as to then protect the industries which helped them get elected.
Well, that's exactly right, but that shows you that the system, like they, a lot of people say we have a free market system and the invisible hand will correct everything. That shows you that that's just not true. It's
no, yeah,
things
it's
stay
total
in
bullshit.
place. Yes, things stay in place because they're rigged to stay in place, not because they're just bound by market factors. That's just not true.
We wouldn't be subsidizing billions of dollars to these massive corporations if the invisible hand of the free market had their way.
Yeah, that invisible hand is just not working hard enough. It needs to step its shit up.
It needs to pull itself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the other thing about this infrastructure plan that I want to talk about is not necessarily the details in it, but I guess the situation of how it may or may not pass. And there's been a lot of conversation about like some Democrats will not vote for it unless they get the reconciliation bill right along with that. Which I think is a really good reconciliation bill. So it has some really good stuff in there, such as like Medicaid expansion. There's like more investment into education. So there's some really good things in there. But the issue is I seriously do not trust the Republican Party or even Joe Biden, to that matter, to actually pass the reconciliation bill. So this is just me being kind of like a pessimist. That I think
a realist.
Yeah, a realist. What I think is going to happen is they're going to give some type of like verbal agreement to the Democrats, like, yeah, we'll pass it or whatever, and then they're going to pass the infrastructure bill, and then the reconciliation bill. They're gonna do something out of nowhere, like, oh, we can't do it because like the Senate parliamentarian or some other shit is why we can't pass it anymore. So who knows what excuse they might come up with, but I think they're going to find some way to figure out how not to pass it and just like screw over the Democrats for believing that they would stand by their word.
Well, as you know, the ninth month of every odd year after the first year of a decade, you can't pass a reconciliation bill. You know, it's going to be like how on SportsCenter or on ESPN, in order to make some statistic look more eye-popping, they'll have some absolutely ridiculous way to present it. Like, this is the first time an NBA player has scored 30-plus points on an odd-numbered Tuesday the week after they got their first... The week after their first child was born, or, you know, some weirdly outlandish situation that, like, of course it's the first time that's ever happened because you picked a very specific set of parameters. It's going to be like that, but the political version of it.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Yeah, basketball, actually all sports tend to do that a lot. But yeah, and another reason why I don't necessarily think it's going to pass, well, at least as not in the way it's formed now, is because Kirsten Sinema has already came out and like, I'm not voting for a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. So that's another issue, because we have like the right-wing Democrats completely just working for the Republicans at this point. They're Democrats in name, but in function and how they vote, they're actually Republicans, and Kirsten Sinema is very much a Republican.
Well, Sinema does have a vacation to get to. We can't forget about that, you know. I mean, she does only work a couple of months a year and get paid, what, $100,000 of taxpayer money just to sit on our ass for most of the year and not want to actually do anything because, you know, bipartisanship is too important or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But I mean, I think Joe Biden was caught on tape like, hey, we got to give the Democrats something so they won't try to kill the filibuster. And I think that was about the January 6th commission, which I don't really understand the nature of the January 6th commission. Like, I don't understand what they're investigating. Like, the FBI has already been arresting people for that, and Trump already has not been impeached for it, so they're not investigating him. So I don't really see. I think it's just like kabuki.
I think they want to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. You know, if there were big fish in the background, kind of manipulating the situation, whether it was paying for people's plane tickets, whether it was, you know, Charlie Kirk bussing people in, whatever it may or may not have been in that regard. I think they want to see how deep it goes, though I don't trust them to be completely transparent in whatever they find.
Well, this is the issue. They've put in so much stock into investigating it that it's almost like their calling card for the midterms. Like, oh, we've held the Republicans accountable for doing X, Y, and Z because they're a piece of shit party. But this is the issue. Like, they're not putting forward anything that will economically help people, and that's why you see like the Democrats at least the Democrats in the House, their polls are going down, so they're pretty much assured going to lose the House majority. And then Joe Biden's his poll approval numbers are going down. So I mean, right now I think they should be focusing more on like economic issues and things that they said they would pass. They never passed the $2,000 checks. It actually ended up being $1,400. They took the $15 minimum wage out of the reconciliation bill. Joe Biden has already stepped back from the public option and completely abandoned that. So like all these things that could help working class people, they abandoned, and now it's like going to come back to hunt them during the midterms because they're not actually doing things for people. And some may say, well, we need the votes because of Joe Biden or Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Well, let them kill the bill and let them like show that you guys can fight and let them kill the bill if that's what it's going to come down to. Because if you're not doing anything and just laying down and dying without any fight, then nobody's going to respect you.
Yeah, I think another issue with that, you want to win on policy, obviously. By focusing on the commission, they're kind of doing the general Republican game plan of just fighting on cultural issues. With that being said, I do think it's quite important to get to the bottom of the January 6th of what happened on January 6th, but I know a lot of particularly impoverished communities, a lot of those people don't really care in so much as their lives have been completely dismantled by the pandemic, amongst other long-standing issues. They don't really care what happened that day. They care about improving their lives. And if the Democrats fail to do that, it doesn't really matter how efficient they are in the commission on January 6th if they don't actually fulfill any of the policy promises that they ran on.
All right. Yeah, it's for me, like, I don't really have a problem with the investigation, but I have a problem with them like leading with that for the midterms. Like if that's your guys' like midterm calling card or what you're running on, I don't see it playing very well for people who are fucking getting evicted out of their houses or losing their jobs from the pandemic or don't have health care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but from the other angle of that, assuming that a lot of people who are struggling immensely will never vote Republican because, why would you? The Republican Party doesn't even pretend to care about that demographic. Maybe the angle that they're going for is trying to win over some of the longtime conservatives who have kind of left the Republican Party because of their disgust over Donald Trump. A lot of the white suburban liberals who maybe tend to vote Republican because they, their family is conservative or whatever, but also lean left on a lot of social issues, recognizing, kind of really pushing that divide with how the Republican Party of today is not the same Republican Party that they grew up in type deal. And then just, again, like the Democratic Party always does, just assuming that minorities and the impoverished will come out and vote for them. Because, as we know, Democrats, especially with, the Georgia special elections last year, they pretty much only won because a lot of African Americans were going out and putting in the work. They were knocking door to door. They were speaking to their friends and family in the community. Someone like Stacey Abrams had a massive impact on the Georgia election. But then the Democrats just kind of think that, I don't know, maybe they just assume that black people are just going to shut up and fall in line and vote for them again no matter what because they don't have a choice. And at some point, people are going to be like, no, we're just not going to vote because you don't do anything. Like, obviously, we're not going to vote for the Republicans, but why would we vote for you when you don't do anything to help me out either? They're just going to completely lose faith in the electoral system. And, that's a pretty scary thought when you consider how effectively and efficiently old white Republicans in particular come out to vote.
Right. Yeah, I definitely understand that rationale. But based on the poll numbers, it doesn't seem to be like boosting their argument. But yeah, I did want to touch on Nina Turner's race, which she recently just lost to Shontel Brown. So she was running in the 11th Ohio district. So this was a very high profile race, and the reason why that is because Nina Turner is a true blue progressive. I mean, she really is the real deal. So because of that, you've seen all of the establishment, all of the big money, all the dark money come out against Nina Turner. I mean, we've seen people like Jim Clyburn, who was nefarious for coming out against Bernie Sanders and endorsing Joe Biden during the presidential primary. We've seen Hillary Clinton come out and endorse Shontel Brown. We've seen a whole bunch of dark money, such as like the Israel PAC.
The Israeli PAC,
we've seen
throwing millions of dollars in the last week of the election, had a huge impact.
And here's the scary part. Well, it's not even scary. It's just like it shows that, the Democrats are funded by the same people. GOP funders came out to fund Shontel Brown. And in that last few weeks, millions came pouring in to go just putting negative ads and lying about Nina Turner, which ultimately cost her the race. And that shows the reason why we seriously need campaign finance reform, because you have all these outside groups that have they don't care about the constituents of the 11th district. All they care about is making sure they get their return on investments, making sure they make money, and making sure they have somebody who plays by the Democratic rules inside the House. And Nina was not that person for them. And it shows you that we have a system that is bought and paid for by the billionaire elites. We don't really have a democratic system. We haven't had one in a while. It's effectively an oligarchy. And this race just kind of exposed that more and more. I mean, it's already been exposed, but it just kind of showed it more because I think this was, I would have to look at the statistics, but I think this was one of the most expensive Democratic races or Democratic House races for a primary in years.
And remember, too, it was a special election, so she will have the opportunity to run for this seat again in 2022, and depending on redistricting, do me a solid, anybody who's listening, Google the 11th District of Ohio. So look at it on a map and tell me that we don't have a gerrymandering problem in the United States. I mean, that is absolutely absurd. And because Ohio has an open primary, there was quite a few Republican voters who swooped in and voted for Shontel over Nina Turner because of a lot of the ad money coming in for the last couple of weeks was purposely targeting a lot of the wealthier white suburban people of the 11th district to come out against Nina Turner because I think these people recognize that a Democrat would win that seat no matter what. So if you have a socialist Democrat or an establishment Democrat, a lot of conservatives in particular will obviously prefer the establishment Democrat. In a perfect world, they wouldn't want the Democrat at all. But when this kind of money gets thrown around, I saw one of the advertisements for Shontel Brown literally had the Israeli flag on it and said something along the lines of, Shontel stands with Israel. Can you imagine an advertisement for a political race in the United States of America with a different country? If it was Iran's flag, if it was China's flag, if it was Russia's flag, oh my God, dude, that would be front page news everywhere. But when Israel does it, it's okay because it's Israel. I don't know. It's just a remarkable double standard that we see in the political advertisement world.
Well, that's why it's extremely hard to take our political system serious, because they're just full of hypocrisy, and it's riddled throughout almost everything they do. I mean, sometimes you see people criticize one party for one thing and then they do the exact same thing, so it doesn't make sense. And that kind of explains what we were talking about with the infrastructure bill, them kind of hailing the infrastructure bill, which was the same bill effectively that Trump introduced. So it's frustrating. Our politics is just completely out of whack. But I think there needs to be some structural change in our campaign finance system. I think Buckley versus Vallejo needs to get repealed, and also Citizens United. a lot of people talk about Citizens United, but I think you also have to talk about Buckley versus Vallejo, because that actually set up set the groundwork for Citizens United to actually pass when it did. So I think those have to be repealed, and we have to introduce public financing of elections if we want to fix our campaign finance system. But I think we have to even go further than that. I think we have to. This is a bit harder one, but I think we do have to break up the two-party system, and we have to have ranked choice voting, because the reason why they're allowed to get away with the shit that they do in each party is because people have nowhere else to go, and they know if they vote for Green or third party, they're essentially throwing away their vote. So it's created a system. It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't, and so it's really just not an effective system for a democracy. So I think that's why this country is very much in decline, because our democracy is just non-existent. And it's not a democracy. It's supposed to be a representative republic, but it's not even that at this point. So I don't know.
When your representatives are chosen by who has the most money, then the rules are set so that the individuals with the most money can continue to hoard that money, so as to be the only ones who continue choosing which representatives can make the new laws. I mean, it's a vicious cycle that really can't be broken until we repeal some of these bombastic laws. Yeah,
and I mean, I think that's a good segue to talk about the eviction moratorium, because one of the reasons why this eviction moratorium almost slipped through is because there is a lack of representation for poor and working class people who struggle, who live paycheck to paycheck. But there was a silver lining this time, and that silver lining was Cori Bush, who camped out on the congressional steps, or the steps of Congress. And this is why, like, having people with diverse backgrounds is extremely important in elected offices, because when you come from a background where you were homeless, and to give a little background on Cori Bush, she used to be homeless at one point. When you come from a background of homeless, you know how bad it is, and you know how tough it is to survive or get back on your feet. And she camped out on the steps and fought for an extension to the moratorium and effectively got it. But one of the things that people don't understand about going homeless or getting put out of your house or living on the streets is that it's hard to get a job when you're homeless. Like, for one, most employers don't want to hire homeless people. They look down on you. And two, if you live literally on the streets or like in a tent or something like that, how are you going to get a job if they have nowhere to call you, nowhere to send mail to you, because you don't have a house or address? Like, it's a lot of hurdles you have to go through. So like, when you go homeless, life is extremely hard. So that's why I think it's extremely important to have actual representation into the House. And I think what Cori Bush did in fighting for the eviction moratorium ban extension is extremely important. I'm pretty sure you heard about that. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I'd just like to mention how on the 4th, I believe it was the 4th, so Wednesday, Jen Psaki said that Cori Bush's protests were, quote, moving, but that phone calls with Pelosi over the weekend were, quote, impactful and influential in the CDC's decision on eviction moratorium. And then she praised Nancy Pelosi's advocacy and commitment to see what was possible. Like, it's hilarious. The establishment just cannot give credit to a black woman when she is the one who comes out and does the work. Like, Nancy Pelosi did nothing. She is the one who let the moratorium run out. She came out like the day of and was like, oh, we forgot. We didn't realize that this date was coming. Like, dude, you've known for months and months and months that this was coming. You did not forget. You just didn't care. Cori Bush was the one out on the steps of the Capitol. She was the one who brought attention to it nationally, because that's really what caused this reversal, was that the people were starting to get pissed, and people were coming out and starting to say, like, yo, this is ridiculous, we need to do something about this, the Democrats would have had no issue just letting that lapse, and Nancy Pelosi in particular just didn't care. So it's kind of hilarious to see the White House being like, what Cori Bush did was definitely tear-jerking, and we're proud of her for standing up for what she believes in, but it didn't mean anything. It was really Nancy Pelosi who was working behind the scenes. Like, shut up. How stupid do these people think we are? The gaslighting is, my God. It's almost like I'm embarrassed that they would think so lowly of the American citizens to even attempt to say something like that in good faith.
Well, it just shows you that they're always going to value their establishment partners over people who actually fight for the people. But the issue was with Nancy Pelosi was this was all grandstanding for her. She never actually cared whether it got extended or not. But the reason why she didn't bring it to a vote or have Congress act upon it is because there were Democrats in the House who were forcing or encouraging her not to put it to a vote or actually act upon it, because lo and behold, or we were talking about campaign finance reform, they take money from the realtor industry. So I think like in the coming months or something, they took like $11 million from the realty industry, which is a lot of money.
And I would wager quite a few of them are landlords themselves.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
Pelosi
100%.
in particular owns like $45 million worth of real estate.
100%. So what they did a little trick, and they did something like a voice vote or something like that, and they were saying like, oh well, we don't have unanimous consent, so we can't act upon it. So they're always playing these tricks in Congress to make you seem like they're trying to fight for you without actually trying to fight for you, because they know something's going to die if they do it one way or another. Because if you have people on the record with the actual vote, then people are going to be a little bit more scared to vote against that, because they might get primary like, hey, you voted against the moratorium extension, but they did a voice vote for unanimous consent, and that means if one person says no, then it dies. So yeah, they're always playing very dirty games. So Nancy Pelosi doesn't deserve any actual praise over this. It should definitely go 100% to Cori Bush, 100%. So yeah, I mean, all in all, I think the way the infrastructure bill is now that they took out the asset recycling and the public-private sector partnerships, I think it's better. It's still not good, but it's better. So if that passes with the reconciliation bill, then it's worth it, because I read an article that said Wisconsin would get like $5.5 billion to fix up their infrastructure, would be quite hefty for Wisconsin. And then with that money, we can upgrade our broadband, we can upgrade our roads, upgrade our transportation system. So we can use that money quite effectively. So if it's passed with the reconciliation bill, it will be it's not the best bill, but it will be a pretty effective bill. It won't change the nation as a whole, but it will put some money in more pockets and stimulate the economy a little bit. And then with Nina Turner, we have to continue to crack down on campaign finance, but it's really hard to do that with Congress, because they are benefiting from this current system, and they don't want to re-govern themselves to the point where it doesn't benefit them anymore. And we just talked about Cori Bush, but all in all, I mean, there's a lot going on with politics. It's very frustrating to be a political junkie, because you continue to see how dirty this game is played at the cost of people's lives. And the only thing I can say is that it's very easy to get down and say, I just don't want any part of this system, but that's exactly what they want. They want us to stop being engaged. They want us to stop being activists, because
apathy allows them to continue doing whatever they want with no repercussions.
Exactly, and that's exactly why we have to step up and continue to fight. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I got. Was there anything you wanted to add?
I think one of the things that's not really talked about in regards to infrastructure that you just briefly mentioned was rural broadband access in particular. A lot of our rural communities not only don't have consistent internet access, many of them don't have internet access whatsoever. And as the world, especially the digital world, continues growing and advancing, it's no wonder so many of these people are so, uneducated or uninformed on both current events and the political system with which they are a part of when they don't have access to the internet. The internet in particular has been kind of a driving force of a lot of the revolutionary ideas we see from young people, because we're now able to get information immediately and directly from the source when something were to happen. If if a police officer murders another unarmed black man in Georgia or Alabama or something, you can see local reporters or local individuals that live in that area posting it online. It can spread, it can be covered, it can now be witnessed by two random young people in the state of Wisconsin, for example, when 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and now currently in a lot of our rural communities, the only way that you would see that information is watching your local news, your local nightly news or whatever. And as we're very well aware and have talked about on the podcast before, cable news is not a great location to find non-biased information and or information that isn't wholly refined to kind of benefit those who are presenting the information. We know, that the six largest media, or that the six largest media companies in the country own about 90% of all television media. So if they don't want you to see a story that reflects negatively on the elite or on them in particular, obviously they're not going to air it. A lot of these rural communities don't have the means to see information as it happens, so they're still living 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the dark. And once we can get high-speed broadband access to a lot of these communities, I think it's really going to shift a lot of the voting demographics, because a lot of these people are now going to be are going to find themselves, the information overload that they'll be witnessing could truly cause a shift in their in the way that they see the world, because they just were never exposed to this type of information before. On the other hand, perhaps the only internet that they use is Facebook, and they fall deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. That is certainly possible. But I think with young people in particular, a lot of younger people are kind of open-minded to learning about the world outside of their little white farming rural community, and I think they would be open to kind of learning about what it's like in some other places in the world, and hopefully that would kind of incentivize them that to see that a better world is not only possible, but that they can help create it.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And that's something we definitely have to work on. But, I think it takes bold leadership to, actually fix the issues that we have and bridge those gaps. But it won't happen with our current system, but we'll see.
When you want to talk about money too, I ran the numbers earlier today to, prepare a statement in this regard, because I was wondering what it would look like. A lot of people don't recognize just how much money the United States is pouring into the Department of Defense year after year after year. When you hear our politicians say, well, we can't afford to keep our citizens safe and healthy. We can't afford to keep the roads they drive usable. We can't afford to keep the bridges from collapsing. Yes, we can. We are giving $753 billion per year to the Pentagon. The 2021 budget for the Pentagon is $753 billion. Let's say hypothetically, I'm going to pay you, Andre, $1 every second. Okay, you're making pretty damn good money. You're making $3,600 per hour, $144,000 a week, $7.48 million per year. Okay, you're wealthy. It would take me 100,561 years to pay you the entire 2021 Pentagon budget by paying you $1 per second. And keep in mind, that's making almost $7.5 million per year. So now let's figure out how much that actually is from a yearly perspective, right? Instead of, the 100,000 years that I would have to pay you back $1 per second. Per actual day, a $753 billion budget means the Pentagon is spending $2.063 billion per day, which equates to $85.96 million per hour, or $1.43 million per second. The United States taxpayers are paying the Pentagon $1.43 million per second, and our politicians want to tell us that we can't afford health care. We can't afford education. We can't afford infrastructure. This, I don't even have a word for it, how absolutely disgusting that is. And what's worse is the amount of American citizens who either don't care or don't recognize how absurd that is.
Well, my inclination is a lot of people don't know, and then some people straight up, they fed into the propaganda, such as like, the American exceptionalism of we need this huge military to be so dominant in the world. So I think that has a lot to keep us safe. But I feel like we're making ourselves more dangerous by endlessly bombing countries and making more enemies. That's actually making us less safe. It's having the adverse effect. I mean, for example, we literally created ISIS because we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq. It wasn't created out of nowhere. Like we were literally implicated on their creation. So that's one example right there.
And don't forget that we funded a lot of the terrorists that would eventually become Al Qaeda in the 1980s and 90s.
The Mujahideen, yep. And then they end up, the Mujahideen eventually turned into like the Taliban, and then a lot of people from the Taliban went to ISIS. So the war on terror is impossible to win. It's a stupid fight, and we shouldn't be fighting it. We should be finding ways on creating more peace, building a stable economy at home. But there's money in war, so that's why we continue.
War creates value, exactly, and a destabilized Middle East makes it easy for us to come in and hoard all the oil.
Exactly. But yep, I mean, we have a lot of work to do in the future. Let's just say the politicians are dropping some heavy loads on our hands in the near future, and we're gonna have to deal with it.
And it's going to have to be our generation, because nobody else is. If you don't fight the status quo is going to continue as is. The powers that be will never relinquish their power.
Exactly. Well, we got to continue to fight, and with our Wisconsin Revolution, we're always going to continue to do that and stand by those moral values. So thank you guys for joining the podcast. We hope that you guys have a great weekend. Is there anything you want to add, Will, before we hit?
Take it easy, everybody. Stay safe and healthy. Get yourself vaccinated. The pandemic's not over. Be safe, be smart.
Well said. All right, everybody, have a great day, and thank you for joining our Wisconsin Revolution podcast.
So we always say the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.